William Birkin is one of the most fascinating and important characters that Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield will encounter during the events of the game Resident Evil 2. A scientist that's been working with the Umbrella Corporation for the entirety of his career, Birkin was at ground zero for two of the most critical discoveries that the company would ever make. Being heavily involved in the research behind the Arklay Mansion's T-virus, and being the one to actually discover what would become arguably the most important thing in his life, the G-virus.
She is my creation!
The story of William Birkin as we know it begins with his young adulthood and his incredible talents in the field of medical virology. Growing up, Birkin would possess a keen intellect, so much so as to attract the eye of pharmaceutical giant Umbrella at the mere age of 15. Umbrella would offer the brilliant young Birkin the opportunity to join an executive training program of theirs ran by a man named Dr. James Marcus, an opportunity which would bring him to the Arklay Mountains in the year 1977. Of the candidates sent to the program, only Birkin himself and another young man named Albert Wesker would show any kind of real promise, and a friendly rivalry between the two would soon begin to develop, with director Marcus himself playing puppet master to see who would rise to the challenge. However, as tensions between Marcus and another co-founder of Umbrella named Oswell E. Spencer would begin to escalate, Spencer would use his authority to have Marcus's training program shut down, and at the conclusion of its final year, would offer both Birkin and Wesker senior researcher positions at his own laboratory, with the caveat that Birkin steals several samples of Marcus's coveted T-virus. Birkin would jump at the opportunity, and in July of 1978 would arrive with Wesker to his new employer's estate, eager to begin expanding on Marcus's work. He would begin by looking into a new virus that had been devastating the continent of Africa, known as Ebola, theorizing that combining it with the T-virus may be able to create a living dead that was capable of surviving and spreading its infection into the general population. This research would yield impressive results, with Birkin and his team managing to create an offshoot of T that was capable of infecting around 90% of the world's total population, turning those infected into sauntering husks capable of spreading the infection to almost anyone they came into contact with. However, despite these incredible findings, Spencer still wasn't satisfied, insisting on a specialty virus that was capable of easily wiping out everyone, a lofty goal that the researchers would struggle to match over the course of the next several years. It would also be during this time that Birkin and the other scientists would start looking for other ways to bridge their employer's demanding 10% gap. They would begin creating disturbing creatures dubbed bioorganic weapons that would be capable of eliminating anyone who was immune to the T-virus's effects. Hunter, Cerberus, Neptune, and others, all being created with the hopes of achieving a feasible solution to their developmental shortcomings. It would also be during this time that Birkin would form a petty imagined rivalry with another child prodigy that would visit Arklay's Spencer estate. Alexia Ashford, a 10-year-old genius, would come to the facility in an attempt to help with their research into tea, a development which Birkin loathed, seeing as his own status as a 15-year-old prodigy was something that he took great pride in, his anger only being exacerbated as the staff around the laboratories constantly remarked on her gifted intellect. These years would also see Birkin beginning a relationship with a fellow researcher named Annette, the woman whom he would go on to marry and who would give birth to his only daughter, Sherry. However, while Birkin would form these bonds to various people throughout his career, it would be his work that would truly define his life. Arklay's work with BOWs was promising, but a serious flaw with all of its creatures was holding back their effectiveness in the field. While these creatures were deadly, none were capable of understanding and acting on complicated tasks, a failure that Birkin and his associates would attempt to remedy with their latest project, Tyrant. As with most of their projects though, this task would see its own set of complications. The T-virus was notoriously rough on a subject's mind, and so Birkin would have to create yet another offshoot, this time dubbed Epsilon, in an attempt to remedy some of its wear and tear. But even with these alterations, the number of people who were capable of becoming tyrants was astronomically low, causing the researchers to look elsewhere for a remedy to these intellectual issues, finding that remedy in a parasite that was being developed in a European branch of Umbrella. The parasite was said to be able to take over its host's brain functions, but unfortunately, no host had ever survived the bonding process, a challenge which the Arklay researchers sought to meet. Yet, try as they might, their subjects would meet the same fate as those in Europe. However, there was one final subject that Birkin and the others had yet to try, a test subject who had been on the premises since his arrival in 1977, a test subject named Lisa Trevor.
Of course, we would use her as our test subject. Surely her unusually high endurance would be perfect for sustaining the Nemesis prototype parasite for a long time.
In 1988, Lisa would be subjected to the Nemesis parasite. However, instead of dying or succumbing to its effects, her body would somehow manage to kill the intruding entity, an outcome which would baffle the researchers and prompt a full-scale investigation into what exactly had happened. An investigation that would shift the course of Birkin's life entirely. An investigation which would result in his finding of what he would dub the G-virus. Birkin would take this discovery to Spencer, who would use his power within Umbrella to help greenlight a new facility dedicated to the research of G. 3 years later, the Nest facility would be created, built underground on the outskirts of a place known as Raccoon City, and Birkin would leave the nearby Spencer estate to become chief researcher on this new project, bringing along a team of his own researchers, including his wife, Annette. For the first few years, this research would go quite well. Building Nest near such a large city ensured that test subjects were never a very difficult resource to come by. But bordering Raccoon would also have its fair share of downsides. Rumors of this large, secretive location would begin spreading through the city like wildfire. And in order to keep these rumors as just that, Umbrella would be forced to pay the city officials large sums of money to keep their operations in the shadows. Birkin even forming somewhat of a relationship with one such official, Police Chief Brian Irons, whom he would stay in relatively close contact with over the security of the Nest facility. However, despite these best-laid plans to keep the nature and horror of their work a secret from the general public, nothing like this can stay hidden away forever, a fact that would be proven in July of 1998.
This does not make any sense. How was the T-virus leaked? And why did it contaminate both the lab and the mansion, as well as a train almost 3 miles away?
That's irrelevant.
In the summer of '98, a lab leak of the T-virus at the Spencer estate would prompt an unavoidable investigation into the woods of the Arklay Mountains. Irons, being unable to run from the incident, would be forced to send in his coveted STARS unit to see if they could find out the cause of these murders and put a stop to them. Birkin, on the other hand, had his own questions about the incident, and while conducting his own investigation with Wesker, would find out that a ghost from his past, James Marcus, had come back to haunt him. With the sole purpose of bringing about the downfall of Umbrella, Marcus had unleashed T into the wild, leaving Birkin and Wesker with few other options than to leave the company that was now surely doomed once word of the incident reached the ears of the public. However, while Wesker was ready to immediately sever his connections to Umbrella, Birkin wasn't yet finished with his work on G. And so, in an attempt to eliminate Marcus before any more damage could be done, he would destroy the Arklay training facility that he'd attended all those years ago, planning on completing his work with G before leaving the corporation, whose days were now numbered. Over the course of the next few months, tensions between Umbrella and Birkin would begin to mount. William had already made his decision to leave, and resentment toward the company that had for so long been his home now started bubbling to the surface. He would begin shopping around for a buyer for his research into G, eventually finding that buyer in the form of the US military, who'd offered Birkin and his family asylum in exchange for the virus. William would agree to these terms. But before he could make good on his end of the deal, Umbrella would catch wind of his malfeasance, resulting in a catastrophe that would spell disaster for every party involved.
You think I didn't know you were coming? This is my life's work. I'm not handing over anything.
We have our orders, Dr. Birkin. I'll ask you one more time. Hold your fire!
In September of 1998, Umbrella would send in its USS unit to capture Birkin and his family and retrieve several samples of both the T and G viruses. However, when they arrived, they would find Birkin totally unwilling to cooperate, resulting in one of the USS operatives opening fire on the desperate scientist. Figuring him dead, the USS would leave William to his fate, and with no other options, he would decide to use the G virus on himself, becoming Patient Zero for G's first trial in the wild. At first, Birkin would retain many of his mental faculties, going after the USS forces that had shot him and killing them all, resulting in a leak of the T-virus that would cause chaos in the city. But as the virus began to consume him, he would become a creature of instinct, the shell of William that remained, no longer capable of controlling the beast that was running his body. In this state, Birkin would seek out his daughter Sherry, the only person with similar enough DNA to bond with his version of G, leaving a trail of ruin underneath the city that he'd helped destroy. William Birkin is not a good person, a man driven so strongly by his selfish desires that he would burn the world down around him to see his creation through to its completion. A man who would inject himself with his own virus to get revenge on Umbrella, even when he seemingly knew it would result in him seeking out to infect his daughter, A man who carried out countless disturbed and morally bankrupt experiments to fuel his own curiosities, and a man who would ultimately become one of those experiments in a well-deserved twist of fate.